It was a resounding victory in the Democratic gubernatorial primary for Molly Kelly. A race her opponent wanted to turn into Bernie versus Hillary 2.0 ended in a landslide, but in the opposite direction. Molly Kelly is our guest this morning. Thanks for joining us, Senator.
Thank you.
A lot of people expected something a bit more competitive on Tuesday. Were you surprised by how that turned out?
I will just tell you, I am very happy about the way that it turned out, and really feel strong that the people were clear in a message. We had a historic turnout. I think you're probably aware of that, of Democrats out voting or just voting in the primary. I set, I know, a historic record for the number of voters. History came out and voted for me as now the Democratic gubernatorial nominee. So yes, very excited, happy about the results, energized, ready to go, and very grateful to the people who did vote for me, and I would like to say thank you to them.
What does that level of turnout tell you about what's coming in November?
You know, Adam, I think one of the things that it says is that the people of New Hampshire are ready for a change in the governor's seat, and that they agreed with my message, that I am building a New Hampshire that will work for everyone and not just a few. As governor, I want a New Hampshire where everyone has opportunities and not just a few. You know, I think Chris Sununu is more interested in and concerned and puts as his priority corporate special interests, and as I am putting the people first in my campaign, and will do so as governor.
Wasn't too sharp-elbowed in that primary, but one of the lines of attack that your opponent took was that you didn't have enough detail or specificity in your plans. Do you have to get more specific in the general election to win?
I think I was very clear about my plans, and I think I was very clear about my values, what I want to do here in New Hampshire. That, as I said, most important to me is to provide the opportunities for everyone in New Hampshire, not just a few. You know that my priority has always been education and will continue to be. I think that instead of giving tax breaks to the 3% of the wealthiest corporations, as our governor has done, I will invest in public education and job training and making college affordable. I think that's a clear plan, and I will continue to talk about that.
You said a few times since Tuesday, Governor Sununu, don't underestimate me.
That's right.
Has he underestimated you, and how?
Well, you know, I've heard just a couple references to the campaign, and also what we hear. All I have to say in response, and just want him to know that do not underestimate me. I have been underestimated before, you know, when I was young and a single mother, and people were clear and thought, oh, she's not going to be able to make it through her education, college with her 3 children, and I did. You know, today I am married with 4 children, 7 grandchildren, but do not underestimate me. And then, as you know, I took on a Republican leader in the state Senate and same, oh, that's not possible. So, and I did take him on, and we did win. Adam, I'm not afraid of challenges. I've been taking them on all my life. And just, you know, a few days ago, we won the primary by 66%. So I think that is my message to Chris Sununu. Also, I think the people have been very clear that they want to change, and they are energized and they are ready to go. And I think that was a real signal from the numbers that we saw that night.
At least in politics, the greatest challenge lies ahead in Governor Sununu. He has generally good favorability ratings. New Hampshire tends to re-elect its first-term governors. So what is the case against a second term for Governor Sununu?
Well, I think, again, that the vote the other night was clear, and that people want a change. That may have been some tradition. That tradition is over. We are moving ahead and out talking with people every day, and clearly I think the most important issue in my message that has resonated and people responded to is the fact that our current governor is caters and puts as a priority corporate special interest, and I will put the people first, and that's what I'm doing.
What are some other key issues? You mentioned education, but what are some of the other priorities that we would see you tackling in a Molly Kelly administration?
Well, sure. You know that we've been talking a lot about paid family medical leave. As governor, I will make that a reality. We know that Chris Sununu said paid family medical leave is a vacation. A vacation, Adam. It is not a vacation. As we know, it is being with a newborn, being with your elderly parents if they are ill, and also being with your children when they need you. The bottom line, it is about being with the people you love the most when they need you the most. For our governor to call that a vacation, I would say he is out of touch. And as I said, I will make paid family medical leave a reality as governor.
One of the big motivators for Democratic voters, it seems, in this primary and beyond is President Trump in opposition to the president. When we first spoke to you earlier this year, you said you'd certainly be willing to work with President Trump to advance the interests of New Hampshire. Is there any sense that you still want to be on that path to working with the president and yet somehow resisting him at the same time?
I think I was clear, and I'm clear today, because the way I feel about that is that there is not anything I can think of that I do agree with Donald Trump. I do not. What I have said, and I still believe, and as governor would be, if there are agencies, federal agencies that I could work with that would be providing resources for our state, such as the funding for the opioid epidemic, of course I would work with those federal agencies. But clearly there is, I can't think of one thing that I agree with Donald Trump about, and so no. I don't see myself working directly with Donald Trump.
Okay, but so you think Chris Sununu is making a mistake then if he advocates for New Hampshire by going straight to the president?
That's up to Chris Sununu. I do know that he said he would be honored to have Donald Trump's endorsement in his campaign. What I'm doing, I'm working on the best interest of the people here in my state. I am focusing on the issues that are most important to them. I am making the people of New Hampshire my priority. They come first, not corporate special interest. And I will make sure that everyone in New Hampshire has opportunities, and not just a few. That's what's important to me. That's what my campaign is about. And I know that from the other night on the election, they are behind me. They are energized. Adam, wherever I go, people are ready and want a change in this state because they know that they want people to come first.
Senator Jeff Woodburn won his primary despite a write-in challenger up there in the North Country. He's obviously facing criminal charges for alleged domestic violence. He received a fairly warm welcome in the state Senate last week when he went there. Got a big handshake from Senator Lou D'Alessandro, another big handshake from Senator David Waters. If he's reelected and you win, will you be working with Senator Woodburn?
Well, you know, I did speak with the chair of the party this morning, and I will tell you there are no resources going forward for Jeff Woodburn's reelection, and I agree with that. I have asked Jeff Woodburn to resign, and there's just no tolerance for domestic abuse.
But if the voters do send him back to Concord, do you see yourself accepting him and working with him?
We'll cross that bridge when we get there, but I have asked Jeff to resign.
You do support so-called red flag gun legislation that would take firearms away from people who appear to be spiraling or heading towards some sort of violent event that might pose a threat to the public. Under that legislation, what would it take for someone to get their guns back? Well,
I've seen some legislation being put forward, and we would work through there. This is a temporary. It's because they were a danger to themselves or to someone else. And you know, what we do need is to continue to put forward legislation, pass laws that provide common sense gun safety. My biggest concern is the children in our schools and making sure that they are safe. And we have talked about that. As governor, I am not going to wait for a tragedy to happen. You know, I do have 4 children, and when they went to school, Adam, I didn't worry about them being affected at all by gun violence in the classroom or on the playground. But believe me, I have 7 grandchildren now, and I'm very, very concerned with them. So I think that we do need to put forth legislation, common sense, gun safety, to make sure that our children are safe.
Now, we just asked the governor about this in the first segment, and this was an issue during the 2016 race. If elected, would you be using the governor's office as a springboard to Washington, either to Congress or the U.S. Senate?
Adam, I am so excited. I am so energized to be running for governor, and it will be an honor if elected as governor. That's what I want to do. I want to make a difference to the people of the state and to build a New Hampshire that works for everyone.
But something that could be in your future, maybe, I guess, or is the governor the end-all be-all for you?
Today, the governor is the end-all. I can't think of anything else I would rather do than to be governor of this state.
All right. Senator Molly Kelly, we thank you for your time, and we'll see you back here in just a few weeks.
Thank you.